Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Season 10, Episode 26 of the DFO Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Brock Segan. With me, as always, we've got Dylan D. Bertham. D, how's it going, bud?
Doing great, Brock. Excited to be here and talk hockey. There's nothing I'd rather be doing right now than sitting here and looking at your two mugs. So can't complain.
And Mike Beebs Bondi rejoins us after a week off. Beebs, welcome back in the saddle, bud.
Yeah,
saddle. I didn't even plan that, and you're wearing a Kentucky Derby shirt. That was just that worked out perfectly.
Just in case people didn't know that I wanted to remind them. But D, there's worse things you could be looking at. The Wings are playing right now, so
they're playing the Sabres.
Yeah, too, so definitely count your blessings that you got these two mugs in your face. Doing good though, boys. It's actually, I had to pinch myself Monday when we woke up that we have 1 week of regular season fantasy left. It's kind of flown by. And one or two, depending on your league type. And when it flies by like it does every year, it reminds us that we are very close to the finish line. So things are good over here. Trade deadline was a big step for us to get over. And here we are about to talk to some of those guys who got moved on and just kind of add on to your guys' Friday episode last week, which you guys killed it, by the way. Yeah, well done.
As expected.
It was never a question.
Yeah, most of our content, we are going to be focused on the weeks 23 through 25 playoffs. So obviously it's week 21 right now. There's going to be playoffs that start next week. So we are going to have some waiver wire, on this show today. So guys that you could definitely pick up for next week, but most of our content is going to be focused on weeks 23 through 25. So next week will be when we really start to ramp up our fantasy playoff coverage. If you're weeks 22 through 24, I'll have some content on the website to help you out. I'll do a strength of schedule, read like an update on that, and new stats, new teams. Everybody's going to kind of shuffle around a little bit. So I'll have an update on the strength of schedule for the weeks 22 through 24 playoffs, have some written content on the website to help you out. But as far as the podcast goes, we're going to focus on weeks 23 through 25 and focus a lot of our playoff content starting next week as we lead up to week 23. So hopefully last week still, the listener base was still going strong. So a lot of people obviously still thriving in fantasy hockey, or at least trying to claw their way into a playoff spot. D, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of today's show, I messaged you the other day, and right now in our league of record, me and you are poised for a first-round matchup, and I'm like, something has to give here where either I'm going to have to lose, you're going to have to win, so we can avoid that first-round matchup, because that would just be awful.
Well, it's going to be on you because I'm on a generational heater right now, and I don't think I can drop either one of these two games. I don't know. Jack Hughes went down for the year, and everyone else is just stepping up and next man up mentality, right? That's what we preach here on the show. And the boys are really coming through. Wyatt's been on fire. Tage is red hot. Caulfield and Slavkovsky are finally clicking together. Brady Tkachuk, like, come on. Everything's coming together at the right time. So, and our boy, Hot Carl Vejmelka that we talked about last week. So everything's coming together, Brock. I don't know, man.
8 straight wins.
Want to be you if we caught that matchup right now. Yeah, we're getting hot at the right time, which is the name of the game.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the opposite boat. Some injuries have derailed me a little bit. Matthew Tkachuk, Dougie Hamilton both being out for basically what looks like the rest of the fantasy season was a bit of a tough pill to swallow for me. But the team's still hot. Hopefully, we're looking at a semifinals matchup, hopefully. So, and then Beebs in our other league, me and you kind of coasting away towards the top of the league, which is always good. D fighting for his playoff live there. But it looks like you could get in, D. So hopefully all three of us make it in that league. Me and Beebs in second and third. So hopefully everybody out there.
A bye.
Yes, the buy battle is on. But let's get into it. As Beebs mentioned, we're going to take a look back again at last week's trade deadline. Just a quick recap. Me and D kind of forecasted what we thought might happen with each of these players. And to be honest with you, D, I think we did a pretty bang-up job. And we'll just kind of go over everything and talk about exactly how everybody's values have shifted since the trade deadline. We're obviously not going to spend too much time on some of these top-end players, but just some quick talking points. We'll start with Mikko Rantanen. Obviously went from Carolina to Dallas. In his first game, he had a goal and an assist in an effort to come from behind to beat the Oilers that fell just short. He started, as we predicted, with Roope Hintz and Jason Robertson. Unfortunately, in that game, Roope Hintz did go down. It does not look like it's going to be a long-term injury. Expected to be back shortly. But for now, he's expected to skate with Jamie Benn and Wyatt Johnson. Could be much worse in their next game. But he's picked up 2 goals, 1 assist in 2 games so far. D, the one thing we talked about was I still think it's going to be difficult for him to see the playing time to get back to where he was with Colorado. Probably going to fall closely in line with what he saw in Carolina. And that's pretty much been the case. 20 and a half minutes so far. But he's looked a lot better in Dallas, a little bit more comfortable than he did in Carolina. How do you feel we hit it on the head last week?
Yeah, I mean, for the record, we stare at lines, and no coach's tendency is probably better than anyone by default because we have to update the site all season long. So I think that should be the baseline expectation. But sure, we'll pat ourselves on the back.
I didn't want to say it, dude. I did not want to say it.
But yeah, I mean, 20 and a half minutes sounds great, but it's still down 2 minutes from where his season average was at in Colorado, right? And I just can't imagine that he gets back there. If Dallas was kind of battling a little bit more than they are right now, that sure, maybe down the stretch they end up leaning on that top line a little bit more. But just as we talked about last week, they're really obviously locked into a playoff spot. They're probably going to have a hard time catching Winnipeg for the first spot in that division. So I think this is kind of what we're going to see rest of the season, which will be great production. I think, like we said, it's a much better spot in Dallas than where he was at in Carolina. Coaching staff there is a lot more solidified in their lines. Really, the one spot that was pretty fluid was that top first line wing spot, kind of just auditioning a few different guys in there throughout the season, like Stankoven. But obviously, that Rantanen spot, he's locked in there now for rest of the season, I would expect. Obviously, doing some juggling now with Hintz out, but once he's back, I would expect they go back to that. Saw some success off the bat. So yeah, I think we pretty much nailed this one. And I like his production moving forward. I think it's closer in line to Colorado than obviously what we saw out of Carolina, but I don't think he'll get back to that same ceiling again.
Yeah, he literally could not have been traded to more of a carbon copy of a team than Dallas. Currently, Dallas is tied with Colorado in goals for. They both have 219. And both their power plays are just within 0.06 of each other. So basically going to the same type of offense. But as you mentioned, D, just not seeing that 2 extra minutes, still very encouraging just with that talent around him. I don't think the Rupe thing, I don't think it hurts him too much. And they do say, as you mentioned, Rupe possibility for Sundays. So you might only have 1 or 2 games off without Rupe. And who knows, maybe there's a connection there with Jamie Benn. And I believe it's Wyatt Johnson you mentioned on that line. But for Rantanen, I think it's just a little encouraging that you didn't have to fully cut your losses from the Carolina stuff. I know if you're like me and you traded him before he got dealt, you're absolutely angry at yourself and you wish you would have wrote it out. But like the Carolina GM, I'm we just got to deal with it and move on. And hopefully Rantanen doesn't go too crazy in Dallas as a Colorado fan.
Speaking of Colorado, we'll stick there with Brock Nelson really quickly. Exactly as we expected, he started with Valeri Nichushkin and Jonathan Drouin on that second line. The one thing, though, we said that it was probably going to be difficult for him to take a top power play spot, although we didn't think that it was out of the realm of possibility. And it didn't take long for him to replace Jonathan Drouin on that top power play unit. So obviously that's a nice boost to his fantasy value. D, we talked about it last week. This is a guy that you have in basically all of your leagues. Must be sitting there feeling pretty good at the moment. It's interesting, only 3 shots on goal through 3 games, but 13 shot attempts. So obviously shooting the pill a ton, averaging 4.3 shot attempts per game. That would put him on pace for close to his career high. So nice to see him shooting the pill. 17 minutes, 44 seconds time on ice is a little bit discouraging, but we said that was probably going to be the case, right? Playing behind McKinnon, who sees so much ice time. The one thing that I guess it's a small sample size, but like the on ice expected goals for numbers 2.4, not great with him and Nichushkin, but they are averaging 37 scoring chances for per 60. So I do think that's a pretty good sign of things to come as they continue to find some chemistry. I feel very comfortable owning Brock Nelson. I don't actually in any leagues, but D, I know you do, and I'm sure you're sitting there feeling pretty good about it. But before I go to D, Beebs, you're our Avalanche guy. You've been watching him play firsthand on a nightly basis. How have you thought that Brock Nelson has fit into this club so far?
Yeah, unfortunately for his fantasy stock, when he was traded, he was 61% owned in Yahoo leagues. So he was out there in 39% of leagues. And I do know that the 39% that was keeping people as well, he's now not going to touch power play 1. As you mentioned, he's made it there. Unfortunately, he's pushed Jonathan Drouin off the power play, which there goes one of my favorite pickups. But that's totally okay because for Nelson, I needed him just to hold a little bit of value here. Unfortunately, by playing on that second line, he is playing a little bit more of a defensive role. But you mentioned it, when you're playing with Nichushkin, it's a high octane hockey, and it's going to be a lot of shots, a lot of pucks around the net. I think that it kind of seems like, it just looks like he's going through those maybe growing pains of just joining a team right away. We're seeing it with a couple different players right now. I'd give Brock Nelson a little bit. He spent almost over 10 years in Long Island. So definitely a new scenery for him. I wouldn't panic if you do own him. As we mentioned, those shot on goal attempts are a lot better than the 3 shots that he actually has. And just a couple names that we really enjoyed in the last couple of years playing in this exact same role: Nazem Kadri, JT Conf for 3 years ago. These were all players who were fantasy relevant, even while occupying that second line. And I think out of all those players, Brock Nelson may be the best goal scorer of all of them. So I definitely think if you roster him, just keep him there and enjoy it. And all it's going to take is 1 or 2 hot power play nights, and he'll be right back there with the nice looking stat line. So I do think his goal totals are going to go down, unfortunately. But yeah, don't panic. Keep him on your roster, and it's a good lineup to be in. D, how you feeling roster and all that, Brock Nelson?
Feeling good. I mean, I talked about it obviously last week, but even in our trade deadline preview episode, I thought this is one of the best hypothetical spots that he could have ended up. So yeah, obviously the ice time isn't as high as it was on Long Island, and I think just by default, and the shot volume isn't going to be as great either. But that exposure to Nichushkin, the amount of scoring chances that they've racked up already, to your point, Brock, and I mean that line I think has scored like 5 goals in 3 games. So the fact that he's only been able to notch a point so far is a little unfortunate, and something that I would expect to turn as things go along, especially with that exposure to the big boys on the top power play unit.
Yeah, and he should have had one or nearly had one against Minnesota yesterday. Ripped one off the bar. He actually thought it was in. He was saying it's in. The ref's like, shut up. That is not in. But yeah, I expect things to continue to trend upwards for Brock Nelson as he gets comfortable in Colorado. Okay, Logan Stankoven was one of the guys that we said, let's just pick him up right away and see what they've got. See where he lands in the lineup. Still only 27% rostered, so he hasn't really, skyrocketed in ownership. The problem with not only Stankoven but a lot of the players in Carolina is Rod Brind'Amour's, I think, addicted to just shuffling his lines. Stankoven started with Aho in the first game, was playing with Kotkaniemi in game 2. He's scored a goal with 4 shots on goal so far, 8 shot attempts. He's averaging 16-17 time on ice, which is up north of a minute from what he saw in Dallas. And D, we talked about, that's about 6 more minutes than what he was seeing recently in about his last 10 games with Dallas. He was down around 10, 11, 12 minutes during that stretch. But yeah, it does look like the Carolina Hurricanes are comfortable using him within this top 6. He did move down to play with Jordan Staal a little bit in the last game. So it's going to be interesting to see where they kind of ultimately settle with him on a landing spot. He's now played on all 3 lines over the course of 2 games. But the real interesting spot is that he's on power play 1, which is great news. And that's where he scored his only goal thus far. And to this point in his career, he only has 3 power play goals, 6 power play assists. So this could potentially unlock a new kind of revenue stream, so to speak, for Logan Stankoven, not a guy that saw a ton of power play usage in Dallas, obviously a loaded power play there. So with power play 1 exposure, I do think that this is a guy that you should certainly be looking at picking up right away. And then just hopefully they settle on a line for him in the near future. If you're looking ahead to just the rest of this week, Detroit on Friday, obviously a great matchup there. And then in Philadelphia on Saturday. So busy night on Saturday, but it's only 11 games. So there's a chance that you have room for him in your lineup on Saturday. 2 really nice matchups. And then you look ahead to next week. They're off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but then they're in San Jose, in LA, and in Anaheim. So 2 really, really good matchups next week as well. So definitely a guy that I want to roster at the moment. D, what do you think about Logan Stankoven so far in Carolina?
I think it just depends on where you're at. Obviously, there's some rest of season upside here, but I think unless you're really solidified and I'm not just talking about locking up a playoff spot, but if you have buys on the line or you have, regular season first place prizes on the line, I'd be a lot more cutthroat with this and maybe treat him more like a streamer. I just have a real problem with how they utilize the wingers in their top 6 and in their top 9. Like you said, looked pretty good in those first 2 games, and it took 2 games for him to end up on the Staal line. The power play isn't that productive. They got the 25th best rate in the league at 18.2%. Maybe he helps that a little bit, but I just think his role is going to be so flimsy moving forward. Like I said on Friday's show, it feels a lot like what we saw out of him towards the end in Dallas, where he was worth playing whenever he got those minutes with the big boys, and really wasn't worth sliding into your lineup otherwise. And again, as I mentioned, there's a lot more spots in that Dallas lineup for him to slot in and be productive. We're really looking at 1 spot, and that's next to Aho, which usually Jarvis on the top line. And they've just shown all season to really kind of have a revolving door here. They got 17 games left in the season. So I don't know. I certainly think he's a great player. And like I said, if you are sitting comfortably in your league right now, then yeah, I think it's a good strat to kind of sit pat on him and hold out hope for that long-term upside. But I just have a hard time imagining that with this little time left in the season, especially the fantasy season, he's going to be able to solidify those minutes in that role on the top line to the point where it's really worth holding on to him in the interim. So I'm a little bit more pessimistic, I would say, maybe a little bit more cynical, but I've just seen them and how they've kept that revolving door all season long. And it's turned me off the situation a little bit.
Well, the one thing that we pointed out last week was that it looked like he was basically a perfect fit for that Jordan Staal line. The way he forechecks, it's like this is a guy that would look really good on this line and just really fit that identity. I think the one thing that's worth mentioning is that he played last game with the Staal line because Svechnikov was out, so Seth Jarvis moved up. So if Svechnikov comes back, maybe Jarvis drops back down. Stankoven moves back up, but he was scheduled to play with Kotkaniemi and not Aho. Anyway, I would honestly rather him play with Jordan Staal lines than Kotkaniemi's line at this point.
Yeah, but I mean, if Rantanen wasn't even holding down that spot consistently, right? Like, I don't know. I've just
no, I agree with you for sure. It's just he's that like Rod Brindamore is addicted. He's addicted.
Yeah.
It's his favorite thing to do.
Someone's got to look into his line changing fetish because something's going on there. But no, I think D nailed it. It's all about where you're at in your season. If and if you're in a keeper league and you're out, you better sprint to the wire immediately for this. But if not, and you're in a redraft with those 3 days off next week, I think you really have to be smart about this one because if you can, I would almost rather have someone off the wire who's going to get 2 games in there and then try to get Stankoven back. And if I don't, whatever, wash it. And I'll grab someone off these streamers as well. I think so. In that case, I'm kind of weary of Stankoven right now. I just think that there's so many decent names around that 15 to 30% range that are on worse teams, getting more ice and just hold higher potential of staying in that top 6 and on that top power play. And because of that, I'm not fully in on Stankoven. I'm kind of like you guys said. It feels a lot of the same as what happened in Dallas. And if it is gonna hit and something's gonna happen, I'm completely fine with taking a chance and letting someone else roster him and take that chance right now. But yeah, names like Will Smith, even our boy Nick Schmaltz, I'd almost rather have in the lineup nightly over Logan Schmaltz, and he's less. They're both less owned, and I think they both have a little bit more potential for points. Obviously, it's league dependent, but Stankoven's not really helping in banger leagues that much, anyways. So. For now, I think that 27% is fair. And if you are in a position where you have an extra roster spot, you're running away with your league, like D said, take a chance on Stankoven. Or if you're out, take a chance on Stankoven if it's a keeper league. But if not, it's just someone to keep an eye on for me. I kind of just hate Carolina the way they do things. It drives me insane.
Since you brought the name up, let's just stick with Will Smith here for a second. He's still only 13% rostered. And if you take a look, he's on kind of like a generational run right now, similar to D's one fantasy team. 18 points in his last 18 games, 6 goals, 12 assists during that stretch. He's been skating on a line with Macklin Celebrini as of late. We pegged Will Smith as a guy that has potential kind of, rookie season in fantasy impact. And obviously it took him a little bit of time to kind of get acclimated to the NHL, but he's really starting to come on as a guy that dominated at Boston College last year, 4th overall pick in 2023. So a guy with a high offensive pedigree that's really, really taken off as of late. Somebody that could be a nice pickup for you heading into the fantasy hockey playoffs if he continues to perform. The shot volume still kind of leaves a little bit to be desired. It's not amazing, but it's not too bad. Either. It's really started to pick up as of late with 21 shots in his last 7 games. So 9 points, 21 shots, averaging 3 shots per game during that stretch, 9 points in his last 7. Really, really good stuff from Will Smith as of late. Okay, now let's move on to another name that we talked about last week. Dylan Cozens goes from Buffalo to Ottawa. D, we talked about how, the, I guess, work ethic was kind of called into question a little bit during his time in Buffalo or towards the end of his time in Buffalo. And it just didn't make any sense given his name is the workhorse from Whitehorse, but he got back to that nickname pretty quickly in Ottawa. His first game, 9 hits, his second game, 8 hits, 1 hit in his third game. But I mean, 18 hits through 3 games is ridiculous. He had 148 hits in 61 games during his time in Buffalo this season, but 2 goals, 1 assist during that stretch as well. I think the one thing he's probably only a banger league target for me really right now. Like, I think that he does have value in standard leagues, but I mean, he's only averaged 15.5 minutes during that time. It is kind of similar to what we saw towards the tail end of his run with the Sabres. He's on that second line with Batherson, which, I would probably be more interested in exposure to guys like Stützle and Tkachuk, obviously. But, obviously, I think there's still room to grow into a larger role here. He's still in the top power play unit. Like, there is an opportunity for this role to get a little bit bigger as they move forward. And the early returns have been solid enough. 15 shot attempts in 3 games. So 5 shot attempts a game. 5 shot attempts. Like, it's been solid. Like, I'm not going to knock the guy for the early returns at all. He's up to 40% roster, so it'd be hard to get your hands on him anyway. But Beebs, I've seen you on Twitter really falling in love, or re-falling in love, I guess, with Dylan Cozens here from what you've seen thus far through 3-game sample size. I'm assuming you rushed to the wire to scoop him up. You're muted.
Yep, I'm absolutely muted, but it's almost too obvious anymore. When a guy leaves Buffalo, there's about a 50% chance that he's going to turn into a superstar wherever he goes. And I'm willing to take that chance on Cozens. But no, you mentioned it, Brock. The guy was just full of piss and vinegar in his first couple of games, 17 hits in his first 2 games. That's something that I cannot let go by in banger leagues. So I had to keep an eye on it there. As you mentioned last night, bit of a letdown, 1 hit, but then he goes and gives us 4 shots on goal. So he's still contributing across the board. I was super encouraged by his 17-27 in game 1, but that had to come with overtime. So again, let's add a minute, maybe 2 on there. So I think you nailed it. When we talk about time on ice so often. So when someone's in that 15-16 range, it's really not that great for fantasy. I'm going to need to see him push 17 to 19 minutes to really justify anything more than his current own percentage. I think that 40 is fair. And I think it's a lot of people who are like me, who are betting on that upside that they also saw a couple of years ago when he had his 31 and 37 year in Buffalo just 4 years ago there. So he's really not far off. We got to hope that there's just some inspiration from getting traded. He's still only 24, 7th overall pick from 2019. So yeah, it's someone who I was willing to take a chance on. And if we're kind of comparing apples to apples, which I don't even know if they are because he's 13% more owned, I would definitely rather have him over Stankoven, just because at this moment, I just think that he's more locked in that role. And I like that potential of, could we get back to your 70-point campaign from a few years ago? But yeah, I think 40%, maybe a little even high for him, but that's a good range, especially if you're in bangers. He is the new Kiefer Sherwood.
Banger league darling right now, without question.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, good for Cozens. Good to see him back in the fantasy spotlight.
I mean, you said like kind of looking rejuvenated. I think it's got to be pretty easy to be rejuvenated going from Buffalo into the thick of a playoff race. And, the game between Detroit and Ottawa the other night, like obviously Linus Ullmark stood on his head and the Sens didn't look that good, but that building was absolutely buzzing. It was super loud in there, and I'm sure the energy is kind of running through Cozens right now and feeling pretty rejuvenated. And they've won some games since we talked about it last week. There's some comments there from Brady Tkachuk, and we're like, okay, how is this going to kind of ripple effect through the locker room? Obviously losing a good locker room guy in Josh Norris, but hasn't seemed to have too big of an impact thus far. What do you make of Dylan Cozens through 3 games?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely better off than we expected to see, right? Him jumping up to that top power play unit already. He's already converted on that power play chance, that big goal towards the end of that game. So, I mean, it's noteworthy for sure. I think he'll probably be on that fringe and certainly worth streaming. But I do think it's one of those situations where you need to get pretty cutthroat at this time of year in fantasy hockey. So if you have the room for him and he's playing on a given night and it's a half decent matchup, that I think it's worth doing. But if his ice time is going to be limited around 15, 16 minutes a game, then I wouldn't, cut him to get some extra games into my lineup if I'm fighting for a playoff spot right now.
I would rather have him over the guy he was traded for, at least in fantasy, and that's Josh Norris. Norris has scored tonight, so that gives him at least a goal and an assist through 3 games thus far, if that's how he finishes tonight. The ice time is up 19-11 through his first couple of games with the Sabres. He's on the top line with Tage Thompson. It looks like a pretty good spot, but Tage Thompson and JJ Peterka must be shooting the pucks only, because Josh Norris now has just 2 shots after 2 games in a period so far with the Sabres. And like, I do think that he's got enough talent to where he could take off, but this is a wait and see approach for me. Like, I do obviously really think that that's a nice spot playing with Tage Thompson without question and on the top power play unit, but this offense has been pretty decent this year, but I still find it hard to really trust anybody, consistently outside of Tage. But, we give a lot of credit to Peterka, so maybe Josh Norris can kind of follow suit as well. But I'm going to need to see that shot volume really take a positive turn. And I don't have high hopes for that. It's never been a guy that's had really, really good shot volume. He's a guy that can score, but it's reliant on converting at a high rate. Is not a guy that shoots the puck all that much. So for me, I'm kind of leaving him on the wire for the most part. Maybe a good streaming option when the schedule aligns. He's currently just 32% rostered. What do you make of Josh Norris so far, D?
Yeah, I agree. I would add in banger leagues, he should have value rest of the season to the point where it's worth holding on to him. He was averaging 3 hits a game in Ottawa. Theoretically, that should go up in Buffalo, assuming they're not going to see as much of the puck as he did with the Sens. Has not been the case yet. Had just 1 hit in those first 2 games. So we'll see kind of what the final box score says tonight. But I do think just based on the productivity there season long, unless we had some super biased scoring coming out of Ottawa in terms of ticking the hits there, he should be worth holding on to towards the bottom of your roster in bang leagues the rest of the way. Otherwise, I would think just based off what you said in terms of the historical shot volume, we're probably looking at more of a streaming target in standard leagues.
Yeah, you guys nailed it. Only 94 shots, even when he was in Ottawa in 53 games. So I don't even know if it's a matter of who he's playing with. I just don't think Josh Norris likes to shoot the puck. But as you mentioned, 94 shots, 20 goals. So you're shooting 21% up there. Pretty insane. The guy has never shot lower than 13.3% in any of his 5 NHL seasons. That's just wild. But with that said, I am spot on with you, D. This is just it's just a spot start streamer. And if he gets hot, maybe you keep him in the lineup. But there's a few other names I'd rather have in. And like you said, at this point, it's about getting as many games you can in a week. And he would definitely be the first dropped on my list in a 12-team league. So I think he's definitely worth keeping an eye on.
Worth mentioning too, Dylan Cozens, Josh Norris. So far, the underlying metrics for both Norris with Thompson and Cozens with Batherson, not great on either side. So it's going to be a situation worth monitoring for both of them. You're going to need to see that improve a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to touch on Jake Wallman really quickly. Obviously, going from San Jose to Edmonton, we wanted to see how he would fit in there. It's only been 2 games. He's played 22 minutes and 20 seconds per game in his first 2 games. 1 assist, an absolutely tremendous assist. The shot volume still seems to be there. 5 shots in 2 games, 9 shot attempts. The hits, the blocks, that's kind of all still there. The hits aren't obviously great for him. He's about a 1 hit per game guy, but the block volume, if you're in kind of those crazy counting leagues, have certainly been good. The one thing, with Matthias Ekholm still being out, he is skating with Evan Bouchard, which obviously opens him up to playing with Connor McDavid a lot at 5v5. So as long as Ekholm's out, Wallman's obviously going to have value, but he's not a guy that's really available on the waiver wire at 70% roster. So no power play time. We talked about his value has the potential to kind of level out in Edmonton just because they score a ton of goals, but the role is obviously going to diminish a little bit in comparison to what he saw in San Jose. One guy that I mentioned last week that I was a little bit fond of, at least keeping an eye on, that you were a little bit less fond of, was Andrei Kuzmenko. And I said, we made a bet, and it was like, hey, will he score 5 goals faster than he gets 5 healthy scratches? And, the first game, it was solid, right? Started on the top line with Andrei Kopitar, also was on the top power play unit. And then it didn't take all that long for the ice time to diminish a little bit, seeing just 11:54 in his second game. So from 15 minutes to nearly 12 minutes in his second game. I mean, that's already just one quick step towards a healthy scratch, but still on that top line with Andrei Kopitar and Adrian Kempe, and obviously still on that top power play unit. So it does look like a spot in which, Kuzmenko, who's had some solid seasons, is capable of producing him. But again, the immediate red flag of him already seeing under 12 minutes in a game raises some eyebrows. So to me, he's somebody that still would be kind of on my radar for a stream while he's playing on that top line. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot of value here. I'm not going to go to one or the other. Raise your hand if you have any thoughts on Andrei Kuzmenko, Beebs.
You know what scares me is LA runs 11-7 quite often. And Kyle Burrows currently isn't in their lineup while Brent Clark is. And if they decide to go back to 11-7, I think we can all kind of see who's coming out here. It's either Kuzmenko or Samuel Hellemus, I think is kind of where we're at there. And like you said, it's a little discouraging to see that 11, what was it, 25 the other night. But with that said, 11:54, give him more credit. With that said, I mean, if he is on PP1 come tomorrow, he is on line one, I'm willing to kind of give him a shot as maybe a deep streamer and someone to keep an eye on, because we have seen these flashes of excellence, whether his defensive play is just as good as mine or not.
That's why he's playing with Kopitar.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why you go with one of the greatest 2A forwards of all time. But yeah, so I do think, though, if it doesn't work, LA's in a spot where they don't really have time to waste here. So it could change really quickly, and they could go back to what was working before, throw Turcotte up there. Who knows? But either way, I think you kind of nailed it. He's just leave him there if you need him. Maybe
it is worth mentioning he has 12 shot attempts in 2 games, 6 shots on goal. So he's firing the biscuit at every possible situation. And he is a guy who scored 39 goals way back in 2023. Any final thoughts on Kuzmenko? D, you look excited about it?
No, I think it is a good streaming target, almost like regardless if he's going to be in that spot, right? But it's another reason to really just keep your eye on the site, keep your eye on the lines page, because obviously with how unsolidified this role is, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but you got to be cutthroat this time of year. If he's in that spot, then great. Like, I'm happy to give him a rollout on any given night. He had 5 games in Philly where he played more than 17 minutes. He had 5 points in those 5 games, right? It's just the other concerns about his all-around game that tend to obviously hurt him in fantasy, because it just bleeds out of, or his opportunities, playing time just bleeds out because of it. So that's kind of where we're at. If he's on the top line, if he's on the top power play unit, and there's a decent shot that he's going to get that kind of ice time, then yeah, I think he's worth playing on any given night. Also think he's worth dropping on any given night if that's not going to happen.
I remember the Kings had pretty decent playoff schedules for the fantasy playoffs as well. And they also have the most games remaining in the NHL at the moment, tied. Actually, after recording this, both the Flames and the Sabres will have played tonight and will be at 64 games. So the LA Kings will be the only team at just 63 games on the season. So they do have the most games remaining for the year, if that factors into your decision making at all. Another guy that got traded last week, we didn't talk about him too much, but Oliver Bjorkstrand went to Tampa Bay. Haven't seen much yet. Has 1 goal in 3 games, 8 shot attempts, 4 shots on goal. Hovering around the 14, 15 minute mark, but he was supposed to skate with Anthony Cirelli and Brandon Hagel yesterday. That's what they did in practice, and that's what they did in the morning skate. Game starts, he's with Yanni Gourde and Gage Gonçalves again on the third line, but he is in the top power play unit, which is good news. Obviously, you've got Bjorkstrand with Point, Gensel, Kucherov, and Hedman. Really good spot there. He's somebody that is very similar to the rest of these guys. I think he fits in right with Logan Stankoven and Andrei Kuzmenko. I'd rather have him than Kuzmenko, at least, to roster at the moment, just because he is on power play 1 in Tampa Bay. That's pretty coveted spot. I would really like to see him play on that second line with Cirelli and Hagel, like they projected. That is a line that dominates at 5v5, and I think that he could really see some heavy production in that role. I mean, he's a guy that scored 1, 2, 3 straight. He's going for his 4th straight 20-plus goal season, but has just a career high of 57 points, or 59 points, excuse me. So he's been relatively capped out, but we know he's got good shot volume. We know he can score. We know he can put up assists. He's got the potential, if he gets to that second line and he stays on power play 1, to really be a late season fantasy darling of an ad. It's just the stars kind of just need to align for him. And so far, PP1 just needs to find a better 5v5 line. And I think that he could be a real nice fantasy asset for the fantasy hockey playoffs. D, thoughts on Oliver Bjorkstrand?
Yeah, I don't disagree. And it seems like there's an opportunity for him to move up there with, Nick Paul currently occupying that role. I think the issue coming in is when he comes in traded to Tampa alongside Yanni Gourde. Like, that's one of the big things that we see at the deadline is coaches kind of trying to manage the disruption to their lineups when these new additions come in. So I think that's obviously the main reason why they've stuck together. They played together a decent amount out in Seattle. So you have that chemistry already built in there, as opposed to adding, one new guy to 2 separate lines. So they've lost 2 consecutive games, though, to the Bruins and Hurricanes. So who knows, maybe another bad performance or 2, and he finally gets that promotion into the top 6. Again, it's just tricky because we're dealing with such a limited amount of time remaining that It needs to happen. If it's going to happen and have a significant impact in terms of the rest of season result, it's got to happen fast. But I totally agree. And we've been saying this all night, but it's just another name that you have to keep an eye on. And if it does happen any given night, he's worth rolling the dice if he's getting that kind of exposure at 5v5 while also remaining on the top power play unit.
Beebs, any thoughts on Bjorkstrand?
No, not really much more I can add. I'm just more floored that he has 20 goals in 5 of his last 6 seasons. Good for Oliver. Consistent. But if there is one thing, he is consistent at posting between 44 and 59 points. So showing that that's kind of a ceiling. I do agree that it could get exciting if he moves up the lineup. But for now, just with not zero, but very limited 5v5 production, I am struggling to fit him on my roster. So I'll let him sit there. He's probably one of the lower owned names on here anyways. So,
Yeah, I picked up Evan Rodriguez at the start of the week as a stream. And then I dropped him for Bjorkstrand just because I was like, you know what, there's too much here. Like, I think there's just too much upside. If like it all clicks, like it's hard to find a guy where it's like, oh my God, power play 1, line 2, like this late in the season on a team and as good as them. So I do think if everything kind of comes together, there's potential here. Okay, one name we didn't talk about last week that Beebs you wanted to bring up, I think he's like 0% owned, but Cody Glass is playing for the New Jersey Devils now after getting traded for the second time this season. He's got a goal and 2 assists in 2 games, but saw his ice time creep up to 16.5 minutes last night. He was elevated to the second line with Jesper Bratt, which obviously that's a pretty good spot. And the Devils are going to be looking for answers with Jack Hughes out of the lineup. They seem pretty comfortable to at least have Dawson Mercer be like their third line center now. And this is a real nice audition for Cody Glass to kind of be a mainstay in that top 6 with Jesper Bratt. So we'll see how it goes. First game in that role looked really, really good. He's also seen power play 2-time as well. So in the deepest of leagues, I think that he's worth a show and kind of take a bit of a wait and see approach here with him, because I mean, if he can kind of find instant chemistry with Jesper Bratt, there is some upside here. 14-team leagues maybe in the playoffs if he continues to get hot. Obviously, guy that was highly coveted in 2017 when he went 6th overall. So there's something here. Beebs, you like him? Are you scooping him in the deepest leagues?
Yeah, that's what that's more what the suggestion was for those people who complain that we don't go to the deepest of depths of leagues. Well, here we are. We're at 0%. We're throwing you this. You mentioned it, a 6th overall pick. That's quite impressive. And just last night, just the eye test, he was making phenomenal plays. He looked like a different Cody Glass than I've seen in the last couple of years. Granted, as we mentioned with trading teams, leaving Pittsburgh, and let's just say the skeletons behind there, all the old bodies, maybe that's what's caused this resurgence. But yeah, New Jersey, they're in a spot where they said, we lost our superstar, we lost our best defenseman. We are still gonna go for it, which is just insane. But as they go for it, they've put their cards into Cody Glass. So if they're willing to do that, definitely keep an eye on him. It's someone who I think you can, you can get in every league. So if he does, keep putting up points, you could definitely sneak him by, and he would get more production than people who are throwing in maybe a third liner who isn't even touching any power play time. I know people get desperate for pickups, so it's definitely just a name to keep an eye on. And hey, he only has 18 games to go here. If he stays hot, and even if he puts up 12 points in those 18 games, he's still giving you 15 and 20. So that's not too bad from Cody.
Yeah, like he just needs to stick with Jesper Bratt. That's really all it is. I mean, he's a guy that's been kind of buried as a depth piece in every team he's been on thus far, and he's a talented offensive player. And now this is maybe his time to show that and flourish in an offensive role with a really good player like Jesper Bratt. So
just don't expect shots. Where it goes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows? See where it goes, right? Like, hasn't shot the puck very much to this point in his career, but is somebody that can definitely put up healthy assist numbers. It's not something that we should. I'm rushing to the wire for, obviously, but I do think it is somebody that's worth at least monitoring to see how things go with Bratt in those deeper leagues. And when the schedule lines up, might not make for the worst streaming target. I mean, when you take a look at that New Jersey roster, who else is it going to be? Seven Nation, maybe. Like after that, it's probably Cody Glass right now. So, okay, a couple other names that we talked about last week that I don't want to spend too much time on. Fabian Zetterlund made his debut with the Senators. He was on the 4th line and second power play unit. Obviously, not touching that until he moves up the lineup. Casey Middlestad seems to be, fitting in pretty well with the Boston Bruins. They had a massive come from behind win the other night. I don't know what to expect from Casey Middlestad moving forward. He wasn't able to do much in Colorado with Vladimir Nichushkin, so I don't anticipate he's going to have all that much fantasy production while he currently plays with Cole Koepke and Vinny Lettieri in Boston. So far from ideal spot there. Vegas, Riley Smith really hasn't moved up the lineup whatsoever. He's with Nick Watt and Keegan Kolesar at the moment. Not somebody that I'm rushing to the waiver wire for either. Maybe a guy that fits the bill for a streaming candidate, but like when you look at that team right now, Victor Olsen on the top line last game was Jack Eichel, Mark Stone, Brandon Saad with the Dorofeyev and Hurdle that's been red hot. Those would probably be better pickups at the moment if you're looking for Vegas help than Riley Smith. Boys, anybody else on the waiver wire right now that you really just say, hey, I want to talk about this player? Before I get to that, though, just want to continue to give recognition to the guy who has never seen a minute of power play time. Alexei Protas, hat-trick last night. He's 5 goals in his last 3 games now. He's up to 28 goals on the season, 30 assists, 58 points. He leads the NHL in plus-minus. I think that's the first time we've mentioned plus-minus on the show this season at plus 39. He still sits with just 1 power play point on the season. So nice to see him get his hat trick there last night. Beebs, I'm sure there's some waiver wire names that you would be interested in talking about at the moment.
Yeah, there is. And actually, one of them kind of came from the product of a trade. So not necessarily someone who was picked up, but Alex Vlasic out in Chicago right now. If you're in need of defensive help, Seth Jones was just moved out. Someone has to step in, take heavy minutes, and play power play 1. And that is currently Alex Vlasic. With that said, they just had a massive debut from their 2nd overall pick the other night. So kind of keep an eye on who occupies PP1, but whether it's Vlasic or the name slipped me right now because it's a million letters long. What's their prospect there, Brock?
Levshinov.
There we go. That's the one. I was like, I'm going to butcher the spelling anyways and look, or the pronunciation anyways. But he had a great showing the other night. He had 6 shot on goal attempts, 3 actually hit the net. So if he steps up to PP1, then everything that I'm saying about Vlasic here, just push that over. But at 13%, I think Vlasic is definitely worth consideration because someone has to eat ice there. But if your league does have plus minus, I would stay very far away from that one. Another name that kind of loses value but was in a top 6 was Mackie
Samoskevich.
There we go. Just nail it. Nail it for me. He was actually contributing quite a bit in banger leagues, playing top 6 and his top power play at the moment. So he makes a great pickup for the next couple of weeks, but Brad Marchand's likely just going to step into that spot and kind of push him out of that role. It looks but
we talked about Samoskevich and Rodriguez last week as being great pickups while Marchand and Tkachuk are out. And Marchand, while skating yesterday, does look like he's a little bit away from playing. So I do still think both those guys are strong pickups while they're playing with Sam Bennett. We talked about that last week, and I actually scooped them both up this week. So I like both of them.
Yeah, no, Mackey's been absolutely he's been a sleeper pickup. He gives me Matt Coronado vibes where it's like this guy's rocking power play 1.
And just such good hit volume too.
Yeah,
like banger league values off the charts right now.
Yeah, he can't get over 10% owned in on Yahoo, but he'll get there. He's definitely, if you're in a keeper league, I would be keeping an eye on Mackey because you can pretty much slot him into that top 6 next year if he's occupying that role now. But yeah, other than that, it's there hasn't been too many openings, but I do.
Barrett Hayton is like 8 points in 8 games since the break. They play against the Anaheim Ducks tonight. Probably going to have a 3-point night tonight. 5 goals, 3 assists. The shot volume's off the charts. Him and Dylan Gunther have been absolutely outstanding on the second line for Utah. Just 22% owned right now. He's been red hot. We continue to talk about Will Smith. Kent Johnson, just 28% owned. Will Smith, we mentioned earlier, at 13% owned. Both have been playing extremely, extremely well as of late. D, do you have anybody you want to throw into the mix before we head
one out? Dmitry Voronkov. I've seen him get dropped in a couple of pretty competitive leagues lately. Like I said, I'm at the point in the season where you have to play pretty aggressively with the bottom of your roster, so I get it. But a lot of these names we talked about, I could just as easily see them losing value in a week. The upside that was there with Voronkov when we talked about him and his ownership was soaring earlier in the season, to me, is still there. He's still getting all those minutes. He did bounce around that lineup, which is why we saw him get dropped. But back on that top line with Fantilli and Marchenko, if Fantilli's still out there, he had a bit of a cold stretch and saw his ownership, but I still love that line moving forward. But Voronkov, yeah, Voronkov in particular is at 28% right now. So that is a name I just wanted to bring attention to, and is a guy that I do think will be worth holding on to rest of season. And for me, like that's kind of in standard leagues, he's almost like the cutoff in terms of ownership and guys that I'm willing to kind of wait out any 2 or 3 cold stretches, or if he drops down the lineup for a game or two. I just think that upside is so good, and he's a really underrated player.
Yeah, I've got him in the league, and he's kind of been he is kind of that breaking point for me right now, and he's like kind of the last line. Like I have 1 streaming spot or 2 streaming spots, and then he's like, okay, if I need to make a pickup, it's like, is it time to cut Voronkov? And I haven't yet because I do think that the upside is a lot greater than what you're most likely going to find on the wire. Beeb, somebody you mentioned in the chat in our podcast chat, I just wanted to bring up to Ryan Donato didn't end up get trading, so his value remains hot. 24 points in his last 20 games is just bonkers. He is shooting 27%, but like he's playing. He's played 19 minutes a couple times in their last few games. He had a 22-minute game a couple weeks ago. But, boys, where do you think Ryan Donato ranks in the league in the last 20 games in terms of scoring?
18th.
Tied for 11th with Nikita Kucherov and Jack Eichel.
I know he's many stocks in him.
He's very much up there in 5v5 production as well.
He has just been absolutely outrageous. 5v5. All right, let's take a look at the 5v5 production over those last 20 games before we go. Just for fun. Just for funsies.
I felt pretty smart before the 4 Nations break. I told people to pick him up, and I actually said, I'm hanging on to this guy on my roster. And I know I winced when I said that, but now we look smart. So thank you, Ryan Donato. Give me those numbers, Brock.
Last 20 games, he is tied for 3rd in the NHL at 5v5 points. The only players with more 5v5 production than Ryan Donato, David Pastrnak, and Jason Robertson. He's tied with Pierre-Luc Dubois. Shout out Pierre-Luc Dubois as well. Been red hot at 5v5 as of late. Really nice to see Pierre-Luc Dubois get his career back on track in Washington. That is one of those rare, like 1-for-1 hockey trades that benefited both teams. Pierre-Luc Dubois has been exactly what the Washington Capitals need as a second line center, and Darcy Kemper has been tremendous for the LA Kings. So really good 1-for-1 trade there. It was 1-for-1, right? I'm remembering that correctly.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. One quick shout out though, friend of the show we've mentioned a lot, Pavel Dorofeyev. Currently, right now, he's right near the Voronkov ownership. He has 15 shots in his last. I makes no sense. It's like people see him get 6 shots a game, and they're like, you know what? I need 7. 15 shots in his last 3 games, so he's averaging 5 across that span. Still on power play 1 in Vegas. If you watch a Vegas game for 1 period, you'll realize really quick that he is the number 1 shooting option on that power play. So I absolutely love Dorofeyev, and you know what? If people want to keep leaving him out there in leagues, I'll own him across the board.
11 goals, 9 assists, 73 shots on goal in his last 22 games. He's just been insane. Yeah, I love Dorofeyev. I sometimes just question myself on why I don't play in like 900 different fantasy leagues and just across all different talent levels, because of the fact that he's only 32% rostered. Him and Hurdle have been red hot for like 2 months now, so makes no sense. All right, any parting thoughts from you, D? Any other last minute thoughts before we head out for the day?
No, I'm good. I'm trying to catch up on these Canuck warmups and confirming whether or not
is Quinn Hughes in for
play.
sure. Oh, still waiting.
It does seem like that. Yeah, they only have 6 blue liners on the ice. Tyler Myers is out, so all signs point to him playing.
He's good. Trying not to have too much PTSD, because the last time that Quinn Hughes was in the lineup, they said he wasn't, and then at 9:58 he decided to step on the ice. So DB, and the legend that he is, was looking at a couple of roster reports and was one of the first ones to report it. So, oh boy, D.
Correct.
Sometimes it helps be paranoid.
Yeah, correct. And keep an eye out for these weekend streamers coming up on Friday. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams that have the Friday, Sunday schedule. It honestly doesn't even probably matter that much, because there's only 11 games on Saturday. So most lineups, you could probably still squeeze somebody in there too. But check out these weekend streamers coming up on Friday. And best of luck if your playoffs start next week. I'll have some information dropping over the weekend about the strength of schedule and some pickups and all that. So keep an eye out for that, and best of luck as the playoffs start. And if you're not starting until the following week, we'll have all that information on the podcast next week. I'm Brock Segan. We've got Dylan D. Berthy, Michael Beebs Bondy here. This has been episode 26 of season 10. See you back here next week.
We'll see you in those fantasy playoffs.
Peace.